Good afternoon and welcome to How to Write a Book. We're going to have a look at the steps you need to take in order to write a book. So let's get started. Firstly, I guess I need to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Leslie Morrissey. And what qualifies me to write a book? Well, I've written one or two. That's me. That was the first book I wrote, called Grow Your Own Achievers, which was a management book. And that was published back in 2002, I think. That was the next one, The Reputation Game, which I wrote in coordination with a colleague, Peter Roper. And that was published about 2013 or 14. And that's one of the series of books that small books. Understanding Communication is one of a series of 13, and there's two series of 13, all management stuff for new managers. And also I've edited more books than I can shake a stick at, so I know a little bit about it, just so you know that. So where are we going? Well, I guess if you're here because you've said this at some point: I've always wanted to write a book, but maybe didn't know where to start, or maybe you've started and you haven't really got things moving as far as you'd like them, or you didn't know where to go next. So this is where you're at now, and hopefully I'll give you some advice on what you can do next. The first thing to think about is, what are you qualified to write about? Now, we've all got our expertise and there's all kinds of things that you know about, but why are you writing this book? So you need to think about, what is your wow? What makes you stand out? What have you got to say that somebody else hasn't said before? Who publishes this kind of book? Now, that might seem to be a strange question to come in here, but if you're thinking of getting published, and we'll talk about publishing a bit further down the line, you need to have a clear idea of what kind of publisher you're looking for, and they need to publish the kind of book that you want to publish. Now, there's a whole lot more to that, and we'll talk about that later, but that needs to be in your perspective. I know when I first wrote my Grow Your Own Achievers book, I published with a business publisher, and I said to them, do you publish fiction? I'd fancy writing a novel, I wondered if you'd be interested. And they went, we'd love to publish fiction, but that isn't our niche and we don't do it. So they were specifically business books. So there were some things, some subject areas they didn't cover. So you need to be clear about that before you go deciding who you're going to submit it to. And also you need to know your competition. So which authors have already published books about it, and why is yours different? So that needs to be in your head. And I'll explain to you as we go along why all these things are important as we progress. Okay, next subject is who your readers are. Now, interestingly, an awful lot of authors don't always think about their readers. They've got passion, they've got a subject that they're excited about, and they just want to get it out there. So they don't think about who's going to buy it. They just assume that because they're an expert, people will. But actually, you'd be surprised. And you do need to know where you're going to find your readers and how you're going to influence them to buy your book. So if you've got a big following already, then you've probably got a sort of ready-made readership. But if you haven't got a big following, then you will need to grow that, and you'll need to do some marketing. So you need to know how you're going to get your book in front of them, because just sort of saying I've published a book isn't enough. You need to make them want to buy it. So the first thing to do when you start to write is to plan and prepare. And I can't emphasize this enough, because it makes your writing process easy. Now, I'm going to assume for the purposes of this, we're talking about a non-fiction book. So you've got a subject that you're going to write about, and you've probably got in your mind some kind of spin on that. And what I would suggest is that you create some kind of skeleton plan. Now, I'm a big fan of mind maps because they're easy to add things to. And I start with one for my book and then one for each chapter. So it's easy to add all of the stuff around it. So you need to know what each chapter is going to cover, have them in some kind of logical order, and so on. And then when you've done that, you can do that for each chapter and add all the things that you want to add in. So for instance, you might have an overview, you might have a quotation that starts a chapter or ends a chapter. You might have a case study, you might have anecdotes or stories, you might have a section that's got statistics, or you might want to include statistics in the narrative. You may have some theory or models that you want to include in it, and they will have to be attributed. You might decide to have a summary, and sometimes an overview is a sort of summary at the beginning, and a summary is more of a tie-up at the end. And why do I call it a chapter recipe? Well, that's easy, because when you're writing a book, the statistics say, especially with non-fiction, most readers don't get past chapter 3, which is perhaps a little bit not good to think about. But one of the things that dislodges readers is the fact that they read chapter 1, and when they come to chapter 2, it doesn't look like chapter 1. So they've arrived at chapter 2 and they're going, oh, I'll just go and get a coffee. And they put the book down and they don't pick it up. And it's not a conscious thing, because we read subconsciously. So it's more of something in the subconscious feels uncomfortable because they've just learned what something should look like, and now they're having to get the head round something that looks different. So that's why I say you need a recipe. So you need to create your structure for a chapter, and then this is particularly important in non-fiction, and then each chapter needs to follow that. So if you start every chapter with a case study or a story, then people sort of go, oh yeah, we're starting a new bit now. And it really is interesting how our subconsciouses help us to digest information, and also equally dislodge us from things that we're uncomfortable with for whatever reason. And quite often the subconscious doesn't operate logically, it just looks different. So it's sort of, there's it's difficult flag goes on it. If you've got this, it will make your writing process much easier, because part of this is the planning. So if you've got a structure, my first book, The Grow Your Own Achievers, I had a brief from the publisher that said, you need to have this at the beginning of every chapter. So at the beginning of every chapter, there's a little sort of roundup of what it is, what's going to be in the chapter. You need to have subheadings every so many words. You need to have a bullet point list every so many words or so many pages. And so that it was really specific. And I'm suggesting you sort of do that for yourself, because I was writing one book in a series that were not all written by the same people. So they all had to look alike. And that was important. So it's not just the chapter that needs to look alike, but if you're writing a series of books, they need to have the same kind of structure. It's only because there's an expectation set up by the first one. So then you come to, when you're doing this, when you're collecting your information, my advice is to get a spreadsheet and note down any quotations, who they're by, any references you make to other books, any also permissions if you need permission to quote something, but any models, where they came from, so that people can refer back if they want to, so they can see that you've done a good job. I know one of the best books I've ever read was Alan and Barbara Pease wrote a book called Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps. And it's quite amusing, but it's also very factual, and it doesn't come over as that. And it was only when I got to the back and I read the bibliography, and I was really impressed, because they'd done a lot of work, and then they'd managed to present it in an easy to consume way. So there was a lot of heavyweight research behind it. If you're going to quote things, you need to refer your quotes, and you need to know you've got permission. Most publishers will ask you to say, you know, are these in the public domain, or do you need permission from the person who said it? So just be aware of that. But a reference list is really useful, because it makes life easier as well when you want to double check something. Then we come to publishing. Now there's two main ways of publishing. One is to go to a mainstream publishing house and try and get them to buy into your book and give you, and although I have to say that in this day and age, you're not going to get a big advance on it. People, for an unknown writer, that doesn't happen anymore. You have to have some legs to get publishers advance. However, they will often take it on board, and I'll talk to you about what you might get going with a mainstream publisher. But today, self-publishing is far more, or what they call indie publishing, independent publishing, is far more prevalent than it used to be. So a lot more people go that way, even quite well-known authors. So you have to know what the differences are between the two. So typically, this is what you will need to do if you're going mainstream. You will need a synopsis, which needs to be no more than 500 words. That gives an overview of what the book is about. And it's not a piece of writing that from the book, it is an actual complete synopsis from start to finish of what the book's about, who it's for, where it's going, and so on. An approximate idea of how many words you think you're going to write. We'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. Who it's for, so who do you think is going to read it? What's your rationale for that? And how do you know they're going to buy it? And believe me, the publisher will ask you these questions and will expect you to provide that information. You need to give them a couple of chapters. Each publisher is different. Most publishers' websites will tell you what they want from you, but they need to see whether you can write or not, basically, and what your style is. You probably would benefit from giving them a list of comparable books, as in others in the genre that you're writing in, and also an outline of why yours is different from these. And also your biography, what's your background, what qualifies you to write this. Now, some of this is, this stuff, but you need to pitch it in a way that will get through to a mainstream publisher. Because also, I would recommend you go and look at their lists, what's currently being published and what they brought out recently. Even if the publisher publishes this kind of book, they may not want to take yours on board if they just published in the last year or so something very similar, depending on what they've got on their lists currently. So it's worth doing a bit of research into what the publishers that you're interested in publishing with might have done. And of course, there is no guarantee. They have thousands of books being submitted every week. You will need to have something that really stands out to them. However, there are smaller publishers. They're not all sort of Simon and Schuster and those kind of people. You can get smaller publishers that are easier to get through to, so to speak, and talk to. And certainly I published Grow Your Own Achievers with a publisher called How To Books, and I actually met with the managing director and the commissioning editor. So, I got to go to lunch with them, which was lovely, and I had a contract from them and all that. So that was great. So all of this is part of the process. And, when you're sort of going, oh, I want to write a book, this seems like, oh, gosh, do I have to do this? Yes, you do. Sorry. It's a business thing. If you go down the self-publishing route, you'll need to have a look. There are so many different types of self-publishing house, and they all offer different deals. They have fees. Most of them, you need to go on their websites and have a look and see what you get for them. And there's places, I'm just trying to think of a few. There's Author House, there's Universal, there's iUniverse, there's loads, there's Lulu. And the thing you have to consider is some of them will literally print whatever you give them. Lulu is a good example of that. If you send them something and tell them what size you want it, they will publish it. They don't ask you any questions. They literally publish what you give them. So if you haven't had it edited, it could be rubbish, because editing is really important. Whatever you tell them a cover should be like, that's what you're going to get. And if you haven't had it professionally designed, it's going to look like it's not professionally designed. The layout of the text, although people say, well, how difficult is it to lay out text? Believe me, you can tell the difference. If you haven't thought about editing, do. With a mainstream publisher, they will design your cover, they will do your text layout, they will have an in-house editor, they will do proofreading. We'll talk about marketing in a minute. So they're all included in your deal with them. If you're self-publishing, you may get some of those things. I have yet to find a self-publishing house that does editing, and editing is not cheap. And I know this because I've edited many books, and I know how time consuming it is. So you can expect, if you've got a book that's say 40 to 50,000 words, you can probably expect to pay £2,000 or £3,000 to have it edited, because you edit it more than once, and for proofreading. The difference being is that if you go mainstream, your royalties will be something around 7.5% of net, which is not very much. So you're not going to get rich on it, but it's quite powerful as a good business card if you're trying to use it to promote your business. If you're going self-publishing, you will get a lot more than that. So depending on the price that you set on the book, you may find that you will pay the publisher something between £3 and £5 per copy, but they all vary, so you need to check that out. But you can get £15 for a book, perhaps, if that's what your recommended retail price is set at, and you decide. With a mainstream publisher, you don't, they decide. So you'll get a lot more return on your investment, but the problem being is that your costs are up front, and your return, it depends on your marketing, which brings me neatly to the marketing bit. Marketing is something you will need to do regardless of how you publish. And you would think, wouldn't you, that you would get a mainstream publisher would market the book that they're now paying to have put together and published. Well, they do a bit, but they don't do as much as one would expect, especially with an unknown author. So they will probably send out a letter to all the book reviewers that are relevant, and it will be just a letter, not a copy of your book, and it will say something along the lines of, we just published this book, it's by this person, and here's 2 lines about who they are, and the book is called this, and it's about this subject, and 2 lines about that. You might not even get the back cover blurb into that letter. And then it says, if you would like a book to review, please let us know and we'll send you one. So they don't even send the book out, because they could send hundreds of books out to reviewers that never read them. So they say to the reviewer, if you're interested, ask us for a copy. So as you can imagine, you won't get loads of book reviews. Where book publishers make their money is on international rights. So they sell overseas rights, and you would get a lump sum for that. Certainly for my management book, I also got a lump sum because one of the institutes, one of the management institutes, bought the rights to have their logo on it, and I sold, I can't remember how many thousands of copies that way, but I had to take a hit on the royalties that went out for. They paid a big chunk and got a lot for less, so to speak. So marketing is something you need to do. So you need to market your book. A bit further down the line, I'll give you some useful link that you might find helpful. Boutique publishing is another form of publishing that sort of sits between mainstream and self-publishing. And in that, they often do have an editor, but they're a much, much smaller business. So you can't just send them your book and they'll publish it. They do pick and choose, but they don't operate on the level that a mainstream publisher does. And certainly the Reputation game was published by a boutique publisher called what's it? Let me just have a look on the back of it. It is Bookshaker, bookshaker.com. So there's lots of options, and you need to have a think about what's going to work best for you. Of course, to add on to that, you can turn it into an ebook, and certainly all of those management books that I did are, half of them are ebooks, half of them are out of print at the moment, but they don't exist as a hard copy book. They are only ebooks, but they're on Amazon, they're on Kobo, they're on Nook. And I went through a publisher that actually specializes in e-publishing to do those. But you can also do audiobooks, but you'll need a narrator if you decide you don't want to do it yourself. And if you do want to do it yourself, you really need to practice so you get good at it. You need decent recording facilities, which you can hire. And you will need somebody who can edit it for you and do audio editing. So they're all costs that come into that. And I'm not going to get into that at the moment because we're really looking about that. I want to give you an overall look at this. So now we're going to write your first draft. So now you've got your chapter recipe, is you follow it and you write around the skeleton plan. So if you know the things that are coming and you've got all your references, you know where all the anecdotes are, you've got the basics that are going to fit into that chapter, you will find writing an awful lot easier than facing a blank screen and trying to type something that's coherent. So the planning is really important. Then you need to schedule your writing time. Now, many a book, and including one I've written, which still hasn't been published, but it is fiction, so it's a bit different. But many a book has not got to the stage of publishing because somebody has the idea, they do a fair bit of planning, and they start writing, and then life gets in the way, or they lose the interest temporarily or sometimes permanently, and they don't actually finish the book, or they find they keep putting it off because other things are more important. So my advice to you is to get your diary out when you're ready to start writing and assign a time every week, or more than one time a week, to just sit and write. And that might be a Wednesday evening, it might be a Saturday morning, it might be every day at 5 o'clock for an hour. Whatever it is, it's got to fit into your lifestyle, but treat it as an appointment. Because if you block that time out, that time is now yours. It's yours to write in. And I don't really believe in writer's block. If you've done your planning, you shouldn't get writer's block. If you write reasonably fluently, you should be able to get around all of this. If you can write a blog, you can write a book. So that's the getting it done stage. Unfortunately, you do have to have it edited. And the first editing is not checking the punctuation, the spelling. That's proofreading. Editing is about content and concept. And a good editor will look at the book, will read it, and will go, okay, does that hang together? Do you need to expand this? Do you need to explain that because I don't get it? Does that need to be in chapter 5 instead of chapter 2? And that's what an editor will do for you. They will then do all those revisions and make suggestions and ask for further information to be added or whatever, or take chunks out of it if they think you've gone on too much, or maybe shorten it down to something more concise. And it will come back to you annotated for you to go through and accept the changes or do work that needs to be done. Then it will go back to the editor for them to read the clean and finished version. Now you've added your bits or, added information that has been missing. And then when everybody's happy with it, it goes to proofreading. That's the last thing you do before it goes to print. And the reason for that is because it's not that an editor will not spot the odd typo or punctuation, but in the process of editing, things get moved around and full stops go missing and the occasional apostrophe gets lost, and the spell checker checks something and occasionally checks it incorrectly and puts the wrong version of a word in. So because the editor's focus is on the content, not on the detail, that's why you have to have a proofread the final thing, and they literally read it looking for punctuation, spelling, grammar, and that's it. They don't look at the content at all. They're just making sure that that's all right. So you don't do that first. And I have had people say, oh, just let me get it proofread before I give it to you to edit. And I'm going, no, don't do that, because I'll change it all and then it'll all have to be done again. And I do know people who've got a friend or a family member who's a complete pedant about English, and they're quite good for proofreading because they will pick things up. So how long does it take to get a book published? Well, not counting your writing time, once you've got an, you know, they say, okay, this is the date we want the manuscript by. With a mainstream publisher, the smaller ones can get it through in 6 months. Bigger publishing houses have things all tied up for 18 months in advance to 2 years. So don't get too excited about, oh, I can write it by the end of the summer and it'll be published before Christmas. No, it won't. Always supposing you can get a contract, then it will take much longer than that. Self-publishing, at least a couple of months, but possibly a little bit more, and you have to allow for that. And, you know, it's no good saying, oh, I'm running over my writing time, can you publish it in 6 weeks? Because if they say it takes 9 weeks to get it from you receiving the finished manuscript to finalized and published, that's how long it takes. You know, they're not going to mess up their schedules just because you ran over a bit. A boutique publisher, it depends, and it can be done within the similar sort of time to a self-publishing process, but can take longer. And again, you would need to have the conversation with the publisher about that, because they are all different. So marketing. When you've got your book, you will need a landing page to send people to. And the smart thing to do is to get people interested before it actually gets published. So if you decide to publish it on Amazon, for instance, then you need, you know, if you've got a date that it's going to go on Amazon, you would probably start working up towards that 2 to 3 months ahead of that date. So you get people excited about it, you tell them what's coming, you give them sneak peeks of bits of it. And I would say I'd have a landing page where people can enter their email address and get advised when it's actually going live. So it's effectively a subscription to know that. So you can get a lot of people to buy on the day it goes live. Or you can get them to pay in advance and for pre-orders, but you would need to give them a date then to do that. You need to have a social media campaign, so the people that are your audience get to know about it, and people like them get to know about it. So you may well need to do some social media ads. Things like Facebook ads are great because you can designate the demographics. So if you have an ideal reader, you can tell Facebook, I want all the people who look like this type of profile to see this ad. And that means everybody, regardless of whether you're connected to them or not, will see the ad. You might want to do email campaigns to your lists. You might decide to add it to your newsletters. You can promote it at events and meetings that you go to. And there is a how to publish a bestseller. Now, this is a paid for product, so I'll tell you that up front. I think it's about 300 quid, but it's a whole day's webinar that's been recorded, and you can buy it and you can actually go through the whole process of marketing a book with a guy who's basically written and sold hundreds of books. So that's the marketing end of it. You will need to have that plan in place. If you're going mainstream publishing, you still need to have that plan in place, because they won't do all of this for you. So another place to go is here. It's on my website, insidenews.co.uk, in the treasure chest, there's a document called Pipe Dream to Proposal. And basically it's a worksheet that takes you through a lot of detail of the things that I've covered today. So it's not meant to be today is an overview. You know, it'll give you some ideas. It'll give you an idea of what you're going to have to face when you come to do this. But basically, that will give you a place where you can actually start writing things down, and you have to do some research. It isn't a quick fix. It takes time, and there's a lot of stuff about marketing and publishing in there, as well as in the writing process, which I've given you an overview of already. So that might be something that's useful to you. So this is what you need to do. Firstly, this is your checklist. Why you? Research your readers so you know who they are and how to reach them. Plan and prepare before you start thinking about writing. Create your chapter recipe. Record your research. So anything you're doing while you're doing in the planning prepare stage, you've got a record of and you can refer back to. Choose how you'll publish, and it might be worth looking at some of the websites of some of the publishers that you are interested in. Write your first draft, get it edited, and then finally, when you're happy with it, get it proofread, and make sure you've got marketing in place, because that's really important. So becoming an author adds another star to your reputation. It's a great way to promote your business and yourself as an expert when you can say, and here's a book that I've written. And if you're doing independent publishing, you can either you can carry a handful of books around with you, and at meetings you can say to people, you can either give them away or you can sell them at meetings. And I know lots of people who've done book launches, even though they're independently published, and people buy at the book launch. So you do need to think about what you need to do. And if you want some advice on that, then give me a call. And here's my phone number. And my email is leslie@insidenews.co.uk. So that's really the overview of what it's like to tackle the planning and writing and marketing a book. It takes time, but it's worth it at the end of the day when you've got your book in your hand. So I hope that's been useful. If you're expecting an hour, sorry, I don't believe in long webinars for the sake of it. This is a sort of just over half an hour, and I'm hoping that you've got some tips here. And if you want some more tips, you know where to find me. And it's on the screen right now. So have a great weekend, and I'll hopefully see you at another webinar at the end of next month.
Thank you, Leslie.